And welcome back, everybody. This is the Becoming an Institution-Level Cyber-Infrastructure Leader Workshop. It's day two, Thursday, August 7th, 2025. I want to welcome you back. And our first session today is deciding which technologies to adopt and when. Our moderator is Matthias Gabbert from University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And Matthias, why don't you get started and introduce the panel?
Yes, definitely. So, as he said, Matthias Garbert from University of Maryland, Baltimore County. We're in the outskirts of Baltimore in Maryland, and I have uh, initiated our high-performance computing facility. So this is how I came to this, and have known Henry for a long time now. I'm thinking that maybe the panelists should introduce themselves first. Uh, and David Anastasio from Santa Clara University.
All right, I'll get started. I'll get us going. Hi, everyone. My name is David Anastasiou. I am an associate professor in computer science and engineering at Santa Clara University in Santa Clara, California. Um, at my previous institution, I built the HPC for the computer engineering department, and then 3 years later moved to Santa Clara University, which was about 6 years ago. And here I'm currently the director of our HPC center and very much trying to expand our computational resources.
Wonderful. Then the second panelist, now let's see, do we have Aaron Bergman, Backstrom from University of North Dakota?
Yep, he's on.
Oh, excellent. Can you just introduce yourself a little as a panelist?
Sure. Yeah, sorry. I've been caught off guard today. My schedule's been double booked. Um, yeah, so I'm the advanced cyber infrastructure here at the university, cyber infrastructure manager here at the University of North Dakota, where I run the Computational Research Center and what we call the UND Dream Lab, which is essentially a virtual reality lab.
All right, excellent. And then we have Suranga Edis Risingi from Georgia State University.
Okay, good morning. My name is Ranga Idrisingha, and I'm from Georgia State University, Atlanta. I'm the director for the Georgia State University Advanced Cyber Infrastructure, which is Arctic. I'm here to discuss any interesting topic.
Yes, that's great. And then we have Kurt Hillegas from Princeton University.
Hi, I'm Kurt Hillegas, Senior Associate Dean for Research Computing at Princeton University. We have been supporting the researchers for about a quarter of a decade, building an infrastructure. We've got about 40 petaflops of computational power and over 100 petabytes of data storage. We support the researchers directly in using our systems in visualization. We provide significant training, and we have a very large research software engineering group.
Wonderful. And then we have Marissa Julis of University of California, San Francisco.
Hi, good to be here. Nice and all. So I'm Marissa Jules. I'm the core HPC manager here at the University of California, San Francisco. Actually in San Francisco. So this is a brand new group for UCSF. We were formed when I arrived at the end of April last year. And up until recently, we had no centralized HPC service or infrastructure for the institution. It was all community grown. So I've been working to build a centralized infrastructure. Before UCSF, I was at Georgia Tech for about, 15 years before that, where I ran the infrastructure and architecture team there. And part of that was close collaboration with the HPC team there. So I've been in and around this world for a very long time. Good to be here.
Yes, that's excellent. And then finally, lost the other computer. It's terrible. Then we have Scott Yockel from Harvard University.
Yes, Scott Yokel. My title is University Research Computing Officer at Harvard. That role is I should say like a couple of years ago I moved into that role and tried my best right now to start like a centralized research computing group at Harvard that focuses on the non-HPC side of research computing. Prior to that, for 7 years, I managed the large scale high performance computing out of the science and engineering enterprise part of the campus. And then before that, I was at a tier two school at University of North Texas and did HPC, just with a handful of people and a lot of grad students. So I kind of a breadth of different experiences with different types and pots of money. Um, and I guess I would also say that like from, like 100,000 core HPC facility to like 100 petabytes worth of storage to then also like deploying our own cloud and partnering with Red Hat and Boston University to doing regulated data. So like all sorts of different um, activities over my 15 or so years at this point. So there's lots of different styles of answering how do you choose technology that I've come across. So I'm excited to be able to be part of this panel.
Yes, indeed. And we are glad to have all the panelists here. Henry, do you have any more guidance of how we should proceed? Or should we just start discussing the abstract?
I think if you all want to work from the example questions, that would be a great way to do it.
Yeah, excellent. So I know that we are nearly to the full hour, so we have 60 minutes to available here for us to talk. And the panel focuses on deciding which technologies to adopt and when. And I'm sure that many of you have lots of experience with these things. And we're having, for instance, the question that you have to balance new technology for a specific individual project with the needs of a broader set of researchers. Maybe people who have made a previous purchase in their roles, you want to share some experience you had or some solution you found how to make a decision what technology adopt if pushed by one group as opposed to by what seemed to be most beneficial to everybody.
I can start here. So the way we think about this is really related to the funding. If someone's interested in a new technology specifically for their research, whether that's an individual faculty member or a department, they will often fund that technology. And depending on the type of technology, we can either manage it separately or we can incorporate it into one of our clusters and isolate it to just the researchers that they want to use it on. So we work with them and help to incorporate that technology. If there's a large direction where we see bigger technology changes, then some of that will often be centrally funded.
I could maybe provide a story of a big acquisition that I went through back in it was like the 2018, 2019 timeframe. This is when at Harvard we were in the process of it was like one of those, cycle of refresh for HPC. And at that point in time, there weren't any other institutions that on the floor had direct to chip cooling within the United States. Ohio Supercomputing Center was in the process of acquiring, and Texas Advanced Computing was like they had made choices, but they didn't have anything like deployed at the point at the time when I was trying to make a decision. And so one of the things that was a driver was thinking about what is the future going to look like from a heat standpoint. And at that point, the big shift was predominantly in my budget when I bought HPC, we bought kind of run-of-the-mill things. And like Kurt said, if people wanted something specific, so like GPUs at that time were predominantly purchased by individual faculty, or like the School of Engineering would buy some. But there was becoming more and more of a shift that we would need GPUs in much larger quantities. So I needed to start to think about the budget was going to shift to a larger percent of GPUs versus CPUs as we moved forward. And then you started to look at like, well, what does the power envelope look like for GPUs going forward, right? And so at that point in time, in 2018, 2019, we were at the point where the standard rack with hot aisle containment, you kind of max out around 35 kilowatts in the rack in the current setup architecturally. But it looked like in the short future, like within a couple of years' time, we would need to be able to get 50 kilowatts a rack or be 85 kilowatts a rack in 3 to 4 years out if you're going to load them up with GPUs. And the problem became, well, if I need to put a lot of GPUs in my deployment, I would start having to space them out a lot, and I would waste a lot of real estate in the data center. And I started to just kind of project forward what that would look like and realize that the Harvard allocation, like the 18% that we had inside of MJHCC, we would just start to like really consume that and not have any capacity if we went air cooled the whole, just going forward 3 or 4 more years, right? Like a whole nother generation. So we started to go the liquid cooling route, and that's when I had to really break out of the mold that we had used. We had been a big Dell partner for, I don't know, like 8 years, 10 years at that point, and had lots of relationships with them, not just through the cells, but through support and through like our team was like Dell certified technicians and stuff. They'd gone through all that training. So there was a big shift in trying to think about do we go with the Dell solution? Do we look at Lenovo? Do we look at HPE? And so one of the things I was going to say today was the principles by which I made decisions. So you can't always just choose what looks like the company that has the best technology, because that's not the only thing that you interface with. And so it was really important in our decision point when we were, especially when it started to lean towards the fact that like it looked like the Lenovo liquid cooling was like a few generations ahead of the options at that time that HPE or Dell had. I needed to start to understand a vendor that we had never worked with. What would be the things or the pain points or the things that we had worked at the kinks out for all the years that we worked with Dell? What would those look like with a new vendor, right? And so we had a lot of meetings with them and came in and looked and said, we're not just purchasing this machine. This sets the standard for what we would go forward with. We always add additional equipment from all the faculty. Like we need to create a new catalog of the types of equipment. So like a little, like this is the standard node. This is like a, 2x size memory node, a fat memory node, a GPU node. Like we needed to have that whole catalog, what a service node looks like, and understand that the cost that we were going to set would be the cost that we would set going forward, not I really did not want to have like I got this big discount because I did this one big purchase. I wanted to understand that like our purchase volume that happens year over year over year is quite large, even though we don't make it all at once. That was just so it was understanding that with sales and making sure that they really understood that with a new vendor. It was having their support people come in and explain how support works. Like we did not at any point want to have to like call in and get level one support and prove to them that the memory module was, bad and have to move it and keep, reporting it. We wanted there to be a really straightforward service model. And so we came up with ideas of having like a parts locker and stuff like that, like, because the data center's 120 miles away. When you go out there, you don't want a part to be missing from shipping, so you can't fix something, right? So there's principles around like the service side of things, the sales going forward and what that's going to look like, the predictability upon shipping and delivery and all that kind of stuff. So there was a catalog of those types of metrics that I had to learn how a new company would operate and interface with us. So I think I was just trying to say like there's a lot of aspects to making a decision beyond just the technology. So it's really important that whatever that is for you, it's important to your organization that you come up with that list before you make a major acquisition, especially if you're going to switch, and partner with a new vendor. So that was my experience, and at first it seemed really risky. But at the end, what was great was I'm about 18 months after we deployed this system, the School of Engineering hired a whole bunch of faculty who wanted GPUs, and we would have not had a way to cool them if we hadn't made the choice for liquid cooling. And shortly thereafter, 2 years later, because of the choices that we made, it made the Kempner Institute, which is this AI institute that Chan and Zuckerberg dropped off a family gift. We would have never been able to accomplish doing what was like a $24 million GPU installation had we not had the like track record of working with liquid cooling at that point. Like, so it was just a vanilla, like, oh, okay, it's just more of this, it's just newer. And it was a much easier deployment because of kind of the history we had kind of set forward. So that's kind of just one, like probably the biggest thing that I was involved in as far as an acquisition and made a major decision change. And I was just trying to say like what were the different decision points? They weren't just technology, there were a lot of other aspects of it. So I think that's important to take stock of. Figure out what that is for you as you go down that journey of making decisions.
Yeah, that was definitely interesting. Do other people have stories to tell?
Yeah, so we have a considerably smaller facility than a lot of institutions here, and our data center, when it was built back in 2012, was basically built for enterprise computing back before everything started to be merged into virtual systems. And so, the best we have for power is 13 kilowatts per rack, right? So we have a lot. We have 5,000 square feet of floor space, but not nearly the power and cooling to populate all that space. And but AI research is the big thing right now, and so we've got a big push on campus to hire AI researchers and acquire new systems. And so, a couple of things related to that. We decided to do a data center upgrade, power and cooling upgrade last a little over a year and a half ago, or about a year and a half ago. We started down the road, and with original budget of $550,000 based off an estimate that our engineering firm gave us. And about 9 months into it, we discovered it was going to balloon to $1 million. And so right now, there's so many data centers being built across the U.S. that I think that's why the costs are going up. But what that meant, one of the reasons we decided to, AI related, decided to build add on the additional power and cooling is because I have researcher or departments coming to me asking to install hardware, and I couldn't do it because I didn't have the power available. And so I would tell them that, and then they would turn around and go to our central IT folks and ask them to put it in their data center. And then they would tell our central IT would say, yeah, that's fine. Well, the problem is it's the same data center, right? And all of a sudden I got central IT telling me that I can't use this power that I had been reserving for other things because they've given it away to somebody who I already told them no to. Um, the other issue with that is that departments and researchers have to make decisions based off of grant funding, and I've got no way to force them to come talk to me. So a lot of times, what happens is either they get funding and they budgeted not nearly enough money to buy into our cluster, or they've got funding they got to spend at the last second before their grant deadlines ends, and they come to me and say, I want to buy this system that's going to, eat up a lot of power and cooling. Can I put it in the data center? I'm like, well, we'd had no opportunity to plan for that, and the deadline's coming up, so the answer to that is no. And I've had lots of different discussions over the years, including with the current administration here, about sort of making it possible for people to come to us sooner and sort of have some oversight in the grant process so that they know they have to come talk to me. And everybody always agrees to that's a great idea, but implementing that's difficult. I don't have a solution for that, but that's often what happens. Um, but we decided that if we upgrade the data center, at least I wouldn't have to say no right away, just to do power and cooling issues. Unfortunately, that 550 or that $1 million worth of cost only gave us an extra 100 kilowatts. And we just bought a Grace Hopper cluster that was supposed to be installed last fall, but because the data center upgrades were dragging out, that's now just going online in sometime around late September or October. Um, uh, I think a big problem that a lot of smaller schools are probably going to have is their data centers were designed when 13 kilowatts per rack seemed like a lot. And it's just not going to be enough. And so we're going to start looking at what we could do. We have the physical space. What we need is basically rebuild the data center from the ground up for AI, for essentially an AI data center. One of the things that this has sort of taught me over the last 12 months going through the whole data center upgrade process is that AI cloud-based computing is looking a lot more appealing to me simply because I can pass the money, or if I can talk to the researchers up front, get into their grant proposals, we can then just use that money to buy the AI resources that they need versus having to go through all this infrastructure here on campus. Because we figure based off of the $1 million upgrade for 100 kilowatts, we figure it's going to be a $10 million upgrade to really boost it to anything that can support a lot of AI going forward. It's with 13 kilowatt racks, 65 kilowatt racks don't really fit our power and cooling envelope.
Yeah, so I'm gonna kind of, since we're talking about facility stuff, I'll jump in and talk a little bit about some kind of leading edge stuff we tried to do at Georgia Tech. So about 10 years ago, a little bit more, we realized that we were rapidly kind of outstripping this old campus facility that had been built in the 1960s. We had our HPC plant in with the enterprise infrastructure, and we had gotten to the point where we were having to remove equipment to add equipment, and the density was low, and the cost to upgrade, power and cooling for the facility was running into the millions of dollars potentially, and was at some point going to require a new service entrance for the building, which was not insignificant since it was in the middle of campus. Getting power to the building was a challenge, and so we chose to actually do something different. It was part of a larger project. We built a brand new data center facility kind of on the edge of campus in urban downtown, midtown Atlanta. And as part of that, we made a couple of key decisions. So one was we chose to go with a partner to build and operate the data center for us because it wasn't, we knew what we needed, but we didn't know how to do it. We didn't have the expertise. It didn't make a lot of sense for us to do that. So we chose a partner. And in that process, we tried to choose a partner that was going to truly be a partner with us and would kind of build it to spec and be willing to understand kind of some of the needs of HPC. And so we kind of went into that with a couple of core design tenets, and one of them was maximum flexibility because we have no idea what's coming into this facility, right? Faculty show up with things that they've already bought in worst case, right? And hey, we need to make this work. Or we didn't know what was coming in the next 3 to 5 years, and we knew density was going to be an ongoing challenge. And so that was the other kind of core design principle we had. So instead of a traditional kind of raised floor, low density data center, we sited our data halls on the first floor. So flat floor, concrete, right? All overhead power delivery. We chose to go with power buses as opposed to traditional, kind of power distribution units and whips in the floor so we could move that power around very easily wherever we needed to. We went with overhead water delivery. We knew we had a target of somewhere 30 to 40 kilowatts a rack, but ideally more for heat rejection. And so we chose to go with rear door heat exchangers and overhead water delivery. And the thought behind that was we could actually push that heat rejection up higher than that 40 kilowatts by making the water colder and increasing the flow rate. And it also, importantly, gave us water right next to the racks or right overhead the racks. And those things, and we made one more design decision, which actually turned out to be not such a great one. And I'll talk about that too. So we decided to make all of the compute ephemeral in not just the sense of like jobs could come and go, but also we weren't going to generate or back up the compute infrastructure, only the storage and the critical nodes, right? And so our initial load was a half a kilowatt for enterprise and generator backed and a megawatt and a half for compute load. And we made that decision knowing that, oh, the power of Midtown Atlanta is great. It's a network grid. They've never had a 30-second outage in the last 30 years. Yeah, so after the data center came online, we had 3 outages in 6 months. And we had UPS, so we could ride out anything less than 30 seconds, but we couldn't ride out anything longer. And through a series of unfortunate events, we had multiple outages. And so I think that design decision, while it saved us money and increased density, in the long run caused a lot of frustration with the user base for our clusters because unexpected outages can cause a day or more of downtime, to restart a system, get everything back online and restart jobs. And so I think that was something in hindsight probably wasn't the best choice, or perhaps a better balance between generator backed and maybe less ephemeral, right? So some portion of the clusters could stay up and running. But I think the other two decisions played out very well. So the idea of the power buses and power delivery helped us a lot with stranding power, right? And also delivering as much as we needed wherever we needed it. And so we had some racks that were incredibly dense. We could bring in super dense GPU chassis, and we could site them. We could cool them because we had the rear door heat exchangers. When direct liquid to chip and liquid to chassis showed up, we could provide water to that. So I think in some ways, kind of making those leaps of faith was helpful. The other thing that was surprisingly prescient was the flat floor, because racks are getting heavier and heavier, and a lot of the raised floors won't support over 3,000 pounds in a rack. And so with the flat concrete floor, we could go far above that, which actually turned out to be really, really helpful. So there were some interesting things we did there. Thanks.
Yes, that definitely sounded interesting. I had not heard of the concrete floor before, but yes, people have already mentioned various issues that can come up. I mean, from cooling to a building design that made assumptions about particularly cooling. Made anybody else want to say anything still on this topic?
Sure. I want to chime in a little bit, just because I'm also from a small institution, so very similar to Aaron and I'm sorry, the last speaker. Yeah, we're running into the same kind of issues. The power was 13 kilowatt per rack, and we're currently trying to upgrade to at least 3-phase power. So we have more density per rack. Right now, everything's spread out, which is a problem for the interconnect. But yeah, we're having quite a bit of issues trying to get the right power and cooling, and we're thinking about adding a water cooling for the next cluster, and that's primarily because really the current GH200 GPU systems are pretty much the last air-cooled systems there seem to be. Anything beyond that is going to be water-cooled. So we're thinking we need to get on board with water cooling to be able to support the next generation of GPUs. So that's definitely part of the conversation. One thing I wanted to add, though, from a small institution, sort of going back to your initial question, is how do you deal with users sort of out of the box requests and things like that? Because we have a small cluster and we don't have a large budget, and we can't really deal with those kinds of one-off requests, a lot of what we do is we also look around the nation and see, does anybody else have the capacity to meet that need through programs like Access, right? And so we will if we can't meet the need, either we will find some other resource where they can go to have that that need met, or alternatively, we will think about, can we add this in the future? So yeah, I think someone in the comments just mentioned about Globus and Globus Compute, and that's something that one of our users came to us and asked about, and we don't have that yet, but we're adding it in the near future. So we put it on the to-do list, to be done list, and hopefully we'll have it by the end of the year. But yeah, that's my perspective from a small institution.
So I was going to kind of dovetail what you had just mentioned, David, is that it's good to come up with like an internal catalog of things that you can provide, whether it's like additional systems that if they wanted to purchase that you could add to your existing infrastructure so that they know that there is some flexibility in that space. But it also keeps it under your control so that it's not the Wild West of them just like going randomly and finding their own vendor or purchasing something and then say, here, put this in your rack and manage it. But also beyond that, right? Like you could, like you just said, like if you have built the relationships, like with the different NSF or DOE, whatever other sites that are important to your researchers, like let them know that like you have that also have that kind of extended expertise and can help onboard them. I mean, like that's like the Campus Champions program, or how it
Yep.
originated was like doing that is also it provides a lot more value to the researchers when they realize that you don't just provide the service that is physically located in the data center, but you can provide services across, a much bigger portfolio.
Yeah.
I think it's really
Yeah.
important. When I was at
Yeah.
University of Texas, we did a lot of what you just described, like what are the other like we had like what are the other types of computing platforms and stuff like that we could get them access to easily, and where we would have like a small number of like credits that we could just hand out for them to, get started and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. And yes, we're part of uh, the Champions program, Campus Champions program. Also, on your first point, we did start a condominium project in our HPC, which allows faculty to buy compute nodes using grant money that will then be integrated into the HPC, and they will have preemptive access over. And that allows us to basically specify these are the nodes we have available. So we made 4 different types of nodes available, and we allow a slight customization, like add some extra storage. But other than that, it's basically this is the node, this is the CPU, this is the vendor, and and more importantly, and this is a point I really wanted to stress out, we have buy-in from central IT, from the deans, from the provost's office. Everybody's on board with the program, so that basically and everybody's telling faculty, hey, if you need compute, go buy a node and add to the HPC. Don't go buy yourself a node because you won't have a place to store it. So that's also key. We're not working separate from the university, but within the university sort of leadership.
Yeah. When I first came to Harvard, James Cuff was running FAS research computing. And that was one of the things that he did a really good job of, is because at that point, we had just opened MGHPCC a couple years before. And so that was a huge investment by the university, or like the collection of universities, to have like this really low cost colo for us to put equipment. But the problem was people were still wanting to like buy a cluster in their lab. They didn't, necessarily trust that like this new large scale centralized place would be the serve all their needs. And so one of the things he did is he worked with facilities to say, hey, if somebody is requesting like a 220 plug in their lab, Like, can you let me know, and then
Right.
we'll figure out like what they're really doing.
Mhm.
Is it a, an X-ray machine, or or is it like a rack of compute? And in that process was able to kind of stave off all of these like individual clusters, and able to like, hey, why don't we pivot and put that in the new facility? And the reason why, well, one of the big reasons for us was that the electricity on campus was like 21 cents a kilowatt. The electricity out in Holyoke off the hydroelectric power was 8.6, right? And so there was a huge cost
Yeah.
savings,
Oh
by
yeah.
doing that. So I think that's another thing, like you said, like it's really important to build the different relationships, and then have all of that kind of leadership really, like if you have like that vision, it's much easier, to work with the faculty when they have, they have their own ideas, but they don't need to be told that they're wrong. They just need to be told to like, let's just pivot that into this other way.
So I think since this is nominally about leadership, I think Scott, you hit on something really important, is building that trust with the faculty. That first of all, you're aligned with enabling them to do the research that they need to be able to do, but also that your group understands the technology really well. We shouldn't be surprised by a faculty member coming and requesting a certain kind of technology. We should be prepared. If your group or you or a significant number of you don't go to supercomputing and spend almost all the time either walking the floor or meeting with vendors, you're missing a huge opportunity. You have to know what's coming every year, what the new technologies are, what the directions are. And then when we had recently a very large purchase that was led by an area of campus, and they came to us with a check and said, buy this. And we said, what are you trying to do? And they told us what they were trying to do. And we looked and we knew that what they wanted to buy was not going to achieve what they had done. And we were able then to lead them to purchasing the right kind of equipment to do the science that they wanted to do. And they trusted us because we had built that reputation over decades of being able to really understanding the technology, being connected to the science that wanted to be done. And so we were able to lead them in a direction that has led to huge success. And they've been very happy with what they've been able to get done on that infrastructure.
Yeah, and Kurt, I think it was great you mentioned the staying up to, like, how do you stay up to speed with what's happening technology wise? And that's a really important aspect, that I didn't touch on, but that I always had done. And if you're not able to go to a supercomputing, don't forget you can request them to come to you and come and give you the
Mhm.
like their spiel once a year about what is
Yeah.
their storage portfolio, their compute portfolio, and start to look at that and see, does that necessarily align with the direction that you want to go, you know? And I think when it, like, especially when the beginning of the liquid cooling stages and stuff like that, or rear door heat exchange and all that, like there's some divergence in the future in which some of the technology, like the big OEMs, wanted to go. Like some of them were like full everything, whole thing, liquid cooled, no fans, completely fanless system, you know? And some are like, nah, we're just gonna cool the chip. We're still gonna air cool the rest of that. And that's a big difference, because that means you as maintaining a facility still have to do all the infrastructure for air cooling. So it's like, where do you want to, you're having to make decisions like where in the future do you want to put your money? I also want to look, I was just looking in the chat, but Manas Vita asked a really good question. She's from FAS Research Computing, and it was about like how much time do we spend doing proof of concepts with our RC staff and all that and other avenues. And one of the things that I've always done before making a purchase was ask the vendor, give me three other, institutions that have deployed this infrastructure, and I want to talk to them. And I don't want to talk to them with the vendor in the room. I want to talk to them without the vendor in
Right.
the room, because a lot of times they don't want you to just talk to them, frankly, right? Because you want to find out. And I think it's the most important thing to do it with a file system. If you're going to pick some new file system, you want to know who out there has run a big one or run it over full and it fell apart, and how do they put Humpty Dumpty back together again? Because you don't want to be the first one to do that. Um, And then, so I think outside of doing your own POC, I think that another one is like make some really good friends when it comes to institutions who are similar in your scope, you know. So for me, like a long time ago, I became friends with a lot of the team that was at Stanford, and we would make exchanges of like, what are you guys choosing? What's the next thing that you're doing, or whatever, you know. So I think that's a really important thing for everybody because like, you know, so
Yeah,
maybe others
You
can
know,
answer the
if
question.
possible, Scott, if possible, get them to send, so for some things this isn't reasonable, like a whole file system, it's not. Get them to send you a seed unit that you set up in your data center with your software stack. The vendors will always say, oh, we have this thing back you can connect to. It's inconvenient for the researchers. They don't do it. It's not configured the way you configure your things. If you can get them to send you a seed unit, even if you have to buy a seed unit,
Yeah,
do it that
yeah,
way as opposed to
yeah.
using something remote.
Yeah, and I think that's what Minas Vita, your question is like how like how much time and what you know do we have with our staff to actually, because sometimes that can be a lot of work, sometimes it can be less, but you know,
yeah.
I know when it comes to storage and file systems, because there's so many different options out there, like doing really good testing and stuff, it takes a lot of effort.
Yeah, and I mean, I was not just suggesting anything that's vendor related. It could also be software that is HPC relevant.
Yeah.
For example, we are talking about AI cluster, GPU-based clusters, and GPU-aware scheduling is an in thing. And then you want to assess how much time you should invest in doing a POC to see if that is a viable option for you, for your cluster. So, it's a fine line between vendor-based product versus HPC relevant software.
Yeah. And we have a number, I mean, I think Mike mentioned like, you know, ACM, SIG HPC, syspros, we've got CARC has call like on the system side, like there are a number of different avenues where good conversations are having like that throughout the year.
Yeah, that was helpful. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I want
Yeah, I
to.
think that
Okay.
one of the other questions was, how do you learn about new technologies and new opportunities? I think it was Kurt who already said it very clearly that supercomputing is a great conference. Did other people have uh, any other particular ideas how you can maybe get into this and get the knowledge if you don't have it from your education itself?
So I'll jump in. So, and I have a little story, and I'll talk to that as well, and it kind of fits into the last thing we were just talking about. So sometimes, even walking the floor at supercomputing and talking to your peers doesn't answer your question because you have a problem that's kind of esoteric and nobody's run into yet, um, or there's not a good solution for it. And this was quite a while ago, back when flash storage was just kind of starting to come to the market. We had some really significant challenges with a VDI computational infrastructure for students and researchers. And there was no good solution. We were using spinning disk. We were using, a top tier vendor. It was supposed to work. It didn't work. And, we kind of did our field scan. We walked the floor at supercomputing and a couple of other trade shows and couldn't find anybody. And kind of through some deep dive of literally reading blogs, we discovered there was this company called Extreme.io, who had just kind of come out of stealth mode. They had a product that looked like it might solve our problem, but it was very unproven. They were a standalone startup, and were really kind of scared to purchase this product, much less deploy it in production. And what we wound up doing was making a bet on this product, but and if anybody's read the book Little Bets, it's really good. And if you haven't read it, I highly suggest you at least go skim it. This idea of making small investments and things and trying them out, and seeing if they work out. And so we decided to make the smallest bet we could on Extreme.io, which was basically we would sign up to let them ship us a device on their dime and use it and prove it out and be kind of a pre-release customer for them because we were in such bad shape with what we were trying to do. It just so happened in the process of that pre-release, they got bought out by EMC. and they became EMC's bet in the flash space, which took our confidence from like this much that it was going to be a viable product to like, oh, EMC actually has to make this work and they're going to put money into it. But we literally found that product by reading trade blogs and reaching out and finding finding a contact for them. It turns out that the product manager for that product was the founder of Vast later on, right? So he went on to do much better things. And Renan is actually the person that we reached out to. It was kind of fascinating how all that happened. So sometimes you have to go non-traditional routes to find the right solution for what you're looking for and take on some risk.
I can give a similar example, but it's completely opposite. We invest early on, flash-based NVMe-based solution, and then the solution actually bought by bigger vendor. And what we found is like with the transition, we lost all the support, and then relationship with the original vendor. So for us, it didn't work out the way that it works for Melissa. So you might need to be a little careful when working with like unknown, really new vendors, because it can go either way.
Yeah. On our side, we're currently trying out a POC on a parallel file system from Vidura. And one of the things I wanted to mention is, why did we choose this POC, or why did we choose Vidura? Well, Vidura is actually Panasys. They just changed their name a year ago or so. And Panasys has been around for a really, really long time. And we had Panasys at University of Minnesota when I was there. And at the time, I didn't have that much confidence in it because, when I was a student there, it did go down quite a bit, or quite a few times. And so I talked to them and to Panasys, to Vidura, and I told them that story. I said, I'm not so sure about this. And they said, we're a very different company now. We've really matured, and our system is much better than it used to be back then. And basically, long story short, I ended up talking to the IT folks at University of Minnesota who are currently still using, the new version of Panasys. And they assured me that yes, those issues are long gone. The new system is quite much better and does not, go down that easily. So we ended up giving them a shot. So we're currently trying out a POC from them. So my point being here is one of the criteria for choosing them was the fact that they do have a long history of working in the space. So even though this is a brand new system for them, we actually got it as a beta, and now they're in alpha. So it's not even in production version yet. But we have the confidence that it's going to work out because they have the history of working in the space for a really long time. So they know what they're doing. That's one thing I wanted to mention. The other thing is, the question was asked earlier is what other resources, and so I wanted to put something out specifically for small research institutions. There's this conference called, more of a workshop. It's the RCSI Research Computing for Small Institutions conference, run by Andrew Ruther and Jason Sims at Swarthmore. So it meets at Swarthmore once a year, and I've been there for the last couple of years. So I think for small institutions, that's a very nice resource to sort of connect to people in your own space, and also find out about other resources available. Because yes, we cannot support large clusters. So our strategy, at least for Santa Clara, is we do want to support a local cluster, We have a very small budget, so it cannot be a very large cluster. So for small needs, we want to be able to provide those resources for folks for both teaching and research. But for anything bigger, then we need to know what those other available resources are and direct people elsewhere.
And GSU, we also support we have a very small cluster. Our philosophy is that we provide like a breeding ground for new research, and then once it grows to some certain level, we try to utilize existing national cyber infrastructure or even cloud. So we try to provide all like most of the new technologies like Kubernetes, you know, HPC clusters, but we keep footprint really small because we are open university and we don't have a lot of real estate. It's very expensive to maintain, large data centers. So what we try to do is like we try to provide enough resources where researchers can experiment and then develop new research. But when it reaches to certain level, we try to utilize existing other infrastructure nationally and then commercial.
Okay, that's wonderful to hear all people's input there. Let's maybe tackle another one. So if you make a decision to buy something and it might have been cutting edge and it sounded really good and for that matter exciting at the time, and then there's problems and maybe spiraling costs appearing, how do you know when to pull back? Do you have any experience where you tried something and you really had to make a change? How did you sell it to the community and to the leadership?
They're talking about a time we made a decision, technology that has not turned out the way we had hoped. Is that basically what you're asking, Mathis?
Yeah.
I've definitely done that. And my team was really mad at me. Um, so this was in the like transition of um, when Lustre support went from Intel to DDN, like as the main provider of Lustre support. So we had a lot of Lustre installations that were like homegrown, but I always wanted to maintain like one system that was like from the group that provided like professional services around support. And so at that point, I chose a DDN deployment, and it was going to be our new scratch file system for our new liquid cooled setup. The challenge was I I don't I mean I just don't think that we did a good enough job like understanding what the future deployment system would look like and how much more impact it would have on the scratch file system. So that was kind of the bad and the design problem. So what had happened is in the new DDN system, you could virtualize, like you had like VM infrastructure inside of the physical box, and you could virtualize the object storage servers, and then you had a certain number of those. And really what happened was when we transitioned to the new cluster, we also transitioned from, I guess like FDR to HDR, whatever. We had like 2 hops in InfiniBand network increases. So we had faster chips and twice the network speed that all of a sudden, so like there was nothing wrong with the scratch file system. And then when we like plumbed it to the new network, all of a sudden we were just really hitting it. And it just couldn't keep up. And what would happen with the CPU load would go too high, the system would get in this rebalance situation, it would just flap back and forth. So this all, and also it happened all over like Christmas break, which was the worst timing wise. And so the team did a good job of like just band-aiding this thing together and keeping it alive during winter break. But like what happened when we came back was that faculty were pissed because like it wasn't like you could get any real work done. Um, and so what we had to do decision-wise was decide, um, and there was a kind of ownership of problem. Like they didn't I don't feel like they were owning the problem and the fact that it just wasn't designed right for our needs. Um, because like it wasn't like the infrastructure was broken. It wasn't like the file system was broken. It just wasn't performing like we needed. And so we had to make the decision internally to not use that as the scratch file system. And so we built our own with other stuff that was actually sitting in the loading dock and just like felt like overnight, had to build out and test out a new file system. And so then when I went back to DA and I said, hey, this system is just not spec'd appropriately for the size of the number of devices that talk to it. Like it gets overwhelmed all the time. And so I worked really, really, really hard and this was the hard decision point, is that in order to make it work, where we could just use it as like lab storage for like fast, like labs that needed like fast storage, instead of scratch, I needed that system to be 2 to 3x larger than the current deployment. But I was not about to shell out that kind of funds for the system. And so what we did is we worked on essentially like bought the expansion at cost, right? So we ended up with 2 to 3 times the capacity and the physical system, but I was not about to shell out the full amount of money for it. So I was just trying to explain like that's kind of one approach would be to come back to the vendor and make sure that they understand that like this wasn't designed to meet our needs, and in order to fix it, yes, some money can come into the system to fix it, but it has to be at their loss more or less, right? They weren't going to really make any money on the fix. So that's like my worst technology decision I've ever made. Not that it was DDN, it was just that like it was under scoped for the true need, and that was just we didn't have the right kind of like solution engineering aspect involved. It was mostly just sales and stuff like that. So that's one approach.
So I'll talk about it a little bit of a different perspective. And first, I'll say that we do always get POC systems, and we have been very good at killing technologies. We bought PsyCortex about 2 months before it went out of business. We bought cell processors. They arrived less than 2 weeks before IBM announced that they weren't doing cell. There have been a number of technologies over the years that we've killed, made the wrong decision. But luckily, there were only POCs. But we've had two situations where we chose to go with the bleeding edge, latest, greatest CPU technologies. The first one was Nehalem back in 2007, 2008, whenever Nehalem was. We were the first Nehalems to come off the line that went to an academic institution. And obviously the first people who ever wanted to use InfiniBand with them. And InfiniBand just did not work. It was broken. The drivers and the firmware were not mature enough yet. So in that situation, what we had to do is we had to become the bulldogs, and we had to beat up the vendors to say, you sold us this stuff, it's not working, you've got to get things done. And it took some time, but not a whole lot of time. We did end up getting that system up and running. The other kind of bleeding edge technology was the Sapphire Rapids. We decided that we were going to replace a cluster with Sapphire Rapids, and started waiting and waiting and waiting. So we had to run the old cluster for a year and a half beyond when we planned to decommission it, because Intel took so long to actually make available that technology. And we had to manage with the researchers the fact that you're not getting this upgrade. And we if up front we should have just gone with the current processors that were available at the time that we were going to buy the cluster, but we decided we wanted to wait, and it was a bad decision, and we had to manage it. But now we have a Sapphire Rapids cluster that the faculty are happy with. So Um, there are a lot of times you make decisions, especially about new technologies, where it can be, the functionality is what you expected, like Scott said, but there are other issues that can come up as well.
Yeah, and I have a slightly different take on a similar decision that seemed like a great decision at the time. So at Georgia Tech, we had a unit that invested heavily in SwiftStack. Anyone remember SwiftStack? It was a software-defined object data store. It actually, the pricing was great. It worked relatively well. It was easy to deploy and manage. And so we had, I don't know, half a petabyte of SwiftStack. It was in use. At Central, I sponsored a footprint in SwiftStack, and then NVIDIA bought it and shut it down. And it was a cloud-based management plane, and that got shut down too. And so we had like literally a few months to exit all of our data and find another solution. And so sometimes even kind of the best laid plans of picking a vendor and doing a POC and it works lovely, you can be forced to exit, especially with these kind of subscription-based services, because it's out of your control if the vendor decides to do something else. That was a really kind of painful lesson to have learned.
Yeah, yeah. So we're looking at the last 10 minutes. That's what I'm trying to watch and see what else we might want to discuss. The experience I had with this was that I wrote a grant proposal for equipment that specifically promised a certain hardware. Yeah. And then this became obsolete by the time we were about to do anything with this. But fortunately, the funding agency was okay with this just as long as I accommodate the underlying science that all the hardware was for. I was able to argue this quite easily. But I could imagine that this can be a problem in other contexts.
So what we do to get around that in grants is we always say we've specified what would be the best technology for buying today. At the time of funding, we will reevaluate and buy the best technology. So every grant we do has those words in it. So that's just it helps to protect you in those situations.
Exactly, yeah. We had a whole bunch of questions in the chat. Can we maybe take one person from the audience who wants to ask the question verbally? Oh, yeah, I see Elijah Ganye with your hand up, and maybe introduce yourself before you ask.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Elijah Gagne from Dartmouth College, and I lead the Research Cyber Infrastructure group at Dartmouth. So this is a very interesting conversation to me. Um, for me, one thing that I've been struggling with is when to use a VAR. There's a lot of them out there, and they can provide a lot of value. And typically, I want to get that value by the consulting that they can provide to me. The fact that they've seen how Princeton's done it or Harvard's done it, and a lot of other bigger shops than us, and they've seen what works and what doesn't, is very valuable knowledge to us. But a lot of times, I already know kind of what I need. I need some H200s here. I need some stuff. And so what ends up happening is I spend money that's been earmarked for hardware to buy more GPU systems or a new storage platform. That money goes through the VAR, which I realize I'm paying a little bit of a premium to use them and pass it through. Um, and in return, I'm getting that consulting and that advice. But there's a little bit of a disconnect for me where I really just want to buy the consulting and get the help and pay for that straight up. And I've struggled with that. I'm curious if the panel has some thoughts and opinions about when to use a VAR, when not to.
So we over the years have had one company that we've used. They originally were with SGI, then with Rackable Systems, now with HPE. ComNetco we use all the time when we buy that because we have gotten that value that you're talking about. They understand and they can help to interpret our needs into the way those vendors want to do things. We've had other VARs that have been an absolute nightmare. In fact, we had a VAR mainline that we were using for IBM, and let me just say they blindsided me in a meeting. I was supposed to meet with the sales rep and his new guy that was coming in to take over for him. I showed up at lunch, and the hosts at the restaurant escorted me back to a conference room at which there were 8 IBM staff and these two people. And I looked at I handled the meeting just fine. Thought it was just a lunch, but it ended up being a meeting. Went straight back to my office and wrote to our IBM sales rep, I will never work with that VAR ever again. And we have worked directly with IBM since then. So um, we work mostly directly with the vendors because a lot of the vendors have very strong technical support to help with designing the systems. As I said, ComNetco has always provided us huge value with first SGIs and basically the HP's technology lineup right now.
Yeah, I've had interesting experiences with VARs. My first VAR experience was back in the fiber channel era, and it was extremely painful, and it convinced me very quickly never ever to use a VAR ever again, because our InfiniBand SAN, or sorry, our fiber channel SAN did not work, except under very specific conditions. I was alluding to it in the chat. However, I've found a few specific cases where VARs are really, really helpful. I think one is where you are working with a new technology area that you're completely unfamiliar and you need a leg up. In those cases, VARs can be somewhat helpful. And I think the other case, and we're currently in the middle of this now, so I'm trying to build a research computing infrastructure for an institution at which there is no kind of consolidated practice to do that. And I am one person, and I was a team of one when I started, right? And so, in order to kind of design and build that all from scratch, it was not something I could literally do on my own without taking 6 years, right? And so to build a team and design and build it out and all that. So there was a strategic decision made to bring a VAR in, and we interviewed a couple of different VARs, and we chose one through an RFP process that is our partner in all of this. And they have been, to be fair, um, extremely helpful in that process because they have been able to fill a lot of those gaps and kind of give us a leg up on this process while we build the team kind of in parallel to the design and the build out of the environment. And I think that's a case where a VAR makes a lot of sense. My next concern is as we move from the build and deployment phase to the go live and the handoff phase, what are all the things that are going to get lost in that process, right? Because while we've been involved somewhat in the build, the VAR has been doing a lot of it for us. And so where are all the little gotchas that we don't know about that we'll have to unwind over the coming years and understand over the coming years. So even that is, I think, a double-edged sword, right? It's given us that leg up, but we know there's going to be a long tail of support, even if we call them back and spend some consulting hours to understand some of the pieces that we just don't know. So that was a great question. though. Thank you.
I haven't personally used VARs very much, but I could say just because of my colleagues here at Harvard that have done that more recently, especially more recently, some of the some of it depends on the relationship you have with the VAR, and what their capabilities at their company are, right? Like yes, they can do architecture, they can do those types of things, and maybe that's a little bit of a value if you don't want to spend all the time yourself doing that. But I think there's another aspect of their if they have deployment services, right? If they have the ability to the proof of concepts that you want to stand up and test, can they like do some of that for you, do that with you?
Yeah.
And it's much easier to augment your staff capacity with
Mhm.
a small amount of money, like say like 20% of an FTE, with the VAR, comparison to try to go describe how you need a new FTE to do testing and do other, like all these other types of things. So it can be useful in that sense, to augment your staff. But like Minnie said, like if they're not doing that, then maybe there's less value.
And I think, Scott, to your point, and I don't know if this is true for everyone, but it's been true in my experience. It's much harder to find FTEs to do work or even parts of FTEs to do work than it is to buy equipment, right? That's always the limiting factor for us. And sometimes VARs can help with that. I agree.
Yeah. But there's a wide variety of what
Oh, yes.
VAR companies do and don't do and stuff like that. And
Very
it's
tricky.
also very relationship based. Like, if you I
Mhm.
think about vendors that way across the board. It's like I'm not here to buy your stuff. I'm here to buy stuff from you as an individual. And I need to be able to trust that person. Like, are they designing this system right? Are they getting us the best deals? Are they going to help us in the support thing, navigation?
Mhm.
Are they going to be upfront when things like don't work well on their end? Like they could be missing components that didn't get shipped. And we're one of like 15 customers that are going to be, set on this like long scope to get their equipment. Like, are they upfront about that? Like those are the types of things. And I think VARs is the same way. Like it's more of the relationship. Like if you could get somebody that you really trust and have a good working relationship with them, you know, that's the important part.
Yeah, guys, I gotta say, any last words? Because we're coming up on time, and we certainly want to respect the schedule here.
What are we going to do about quantum?
We got a quantum computer going into HPCC. There's like some state funded thing. It's pretty neat. I went and saw it. I went and saw it like in the lab that's in Cambridge, but people are going to do it. It's going to be there.
Yeah, and I think the remark about facilities we heard earlier. Yeah, yeah, power is such a thing. Yeah, it is definitely true that if you can get facilities to stop some crazy stuff, that would be good. Yeah, we've seen it that the deans have not been willing to support the stopping. So, that's my 2 cents on this. But yeah, so I thank everybody in the audience for attending. Henry, of course, for organizing. Always ready for any last words from him. And most importantly, all the panelists for attending and bringing all their knowledge to the audience. A clap to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been great. Enjoyed it.
Thank you all. This was a fantastic panel, and I really appreciate y'all putting this together. And I can see, I was going to say, let's have a round of virtual applause, but I can see that that's already happening. So let's just keep that up. And a quick program note, we are just under an hour away from our next panel, which is Leading Teams of Cyber Infrastructure Professionals. And that'll be followed later in the afternoon by low-cost solutions for hardware. And so I think we'll have a really good wrap up to the day coming up. So stay logged in. We'll leave the session live. I'm going to stop the recording, but we'll keep the session live and we'll see you all at the top of the hour for leading teams of cyber infrastructure professionals. Thank you all.